All right. So just to be fair and just to be clear, just so everybody knows, this is much more what I do for a living than being a developer. It may shock you to know that, but I don't actually do a whole lot of development anymore. I do a lot of sales support, and I have come a long way from the developer that I was to the realization of how do you actually explain what you want to somebody who doesn't know you, somebody who is not as knowledgeable in the area that you're talking to, and somebody that you actually want to be able to truly understand what you're trying to tell them, right? So that's kind of what this is about, right? Most of you don't do presentations like I do, right? That's fine. Some of you will have to. So here's some hints and tips. But what my overall goal is to try and help you do a better presentation, right? Without judging anybody ever, right? So please feel free to interrupt. I'd be disappointed if you don't, Joe. All right. So.
Wait, you don't write code?
Piss off.
We may have to abruptly end this.
I do write code, but I don't present about my code, and there's a reason.
Because it's jQuery. We know. It's okay. This is a safe space, Mark.
I wasn't joking about Bootstrap. All right. So here's my agenda for the day. This is what I'm going to talk about. And what you will find is I'm going to refer to this a lot, right? So what I'm going to start out by is explaining why what I want to present is all about what I want. I'm going to point out the obvious. I'm going to repeat myself a lot. It's going to get really good. And then we're going to talk about what I should have talked about, and it's what you need to remember, right? I want to be able to listen to technical presentations, better technical presentations, any kind of technical presentation, but in the context of a better technical presentation. I want to be able to teach and mentor people, not suffer death by PowerPoint, not to have to read slides and be told a story, right? Ultimately, I want beer, right? But this is not how we're going to do a presentation, okay? I just failed epically in so many ways to give a presentation, right? Let's talk about why. So for the first thing I did was I put far too much on the screen. You were all looking at everything on the screen. You were all reading ahead. You were all going, oh, what's there? And you weren't paying attention to me. What I need to do is put on the screen what I want to talk about so that you're paying attention to it. So I'm going to talk about, it's all about what I want. Then we're going to move on to the pointing out the obvious, which I'm already doing. In case you've missed it, I'm going to repeat myself. It's going to get good. Okay, right, let's get started. Okay, so what I really want is beer, right? What I really want is to show you how to tell a story. And as I go through this, and when I'm done, for those of you that care about it, I'm actually going to show you how I do this in PowerPoint as well, right? I've already failed. There are too many words on the screen. When you're telling a story, this is not a book, right? So a book is something that you give to somebody else and they can read at their own time. When you were telling the story and when you were giving the presentation, if you're going to write all the words on a screen, they don't need you. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but the more words you write on the screen, the less the audience needs you, right? So when I look at this, that's a whole lot of words on the screen, and I read them. So why have me here, right? This is what it should have been, but that transition was terrible, right? I'm going to go from here. I'm going to change it. I'm not going to explain why. Let the story tell itself through the presentation. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using all of these words, I'm going to use some different words. And just by doing that simple little thing, it makes the whole presentation easier. You are all web developers, right? You're all web developers. You understand, and I have said this before and been laughed at, that no one gives a shit about your code. It is all about the experience that the users have through the code and what you build for them. The same goes into presenting. Whether it's a presentation, whether it's a tech talk, whatever it is, right? Nobody cares about how you do it. They care about what they're seeing and how they are experiencing what you are giving to them.
Yeah, I'm experiencing bad alignment.
Shut up.
But as a web developer.
Transitions
Anyways,
matter.
I'm sorry.
I know, you're good. I'm not going to admit that I started this yesterday. Oh, shit. Okay, so this is not a book, right? Don't treat it like a book. Books have lots of words. Your presentation does not. Words on the screen are bad. And more importantly, this crane is completely pointless. But it did keep your attention on the screen. You did keep looking at it. Never occurred to you, what the hell is that? Why is it on the screen? But it captured your attention. The point of showing you this is, I wasn't talking about it, you were looking at it. That's what people do when you put stuff on the screen. So when you put stuff on the screen, do you really want people to be looking at it? Don't put stuff on the screen if you don't want them to be looking at it. If it's not relevant to what you're talking about, it is a distraction. All right, rinse and repeat. So you'll notice that I keep coming back to this point. What I'm doing is I'm grounding everybody on where we are in the presentation and where we are in the story. You know, at this point, we're about halfway through, right? But by coming back to the point and coming back to the center, it also gives me an opportunity to make sure that everybody is with me. Repetition is a really good thing when you're telling a story. Repetition. Come back. So we said this before. Let's go into this a little bit more. Let's look into this a little bit more. All right, let's talk about this. Okay. You need to make sure that you're always anchoring the audience. And what I mean is give them context. Why are you showing them this today? I mean, I kind of already told you, I wanted to show you this because I think you could all be better at doing presentations. And if I'm doing a really bad job here, I should really consider my life choices. Okay, fine, right? But keep anchoring the audience and where we are in the presentation and where we are in the knowledge and the information that you're telling them. Make common sense transitions from here to there and draw the whole thing up in a summary when you're finished, right? Every story should have a start, a middle, and an end, and it should have a logical progression as you go through it. You can have terrible transitions. You're all web developers. Just because you can does not mean that you should, but you can, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example of a story that I had to put together and why I felt it was necessary to be able to do this. And this, I think, is something that you will find relevant when you are proposing internally to, I want to do this, or this is what we should do, or what have you. Right. So here's an architecture diagram. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm going to tell you about it. So what's going to happen is that someone's going to fill out a form. We're going to call it a questionnaire, right? And so, you know, imagine I'm stood in a room with a laser pointer flashing up at the screen, and I'm waving this and I'm doing this. Once the questionnaire has been filled out, somebody goes to the API that's hosted in Azure and it does something really interesting. And from that, we get some really awesome capabilities. Something new happens and it does some stuff. Yeah. At this point, if we have an external system, it can absolutely be integrated into the process at this point. We're going to play some music, add customizations, add some secret sauce, and ultimately, we're going to end up with a site where Mark and Joe are engaged, right? You were all looking at this picture and reading through everything on the picture way before I mentioned it. You were all looking at where are the arrows going? How am I following this? You may have been paying attention to what I said, but not necessarily. And the more complicated this is, and the more important each individual step is, the less likely you are to have somebody listen and hear you as they're speaking. All right? And I'm now grounding you on popcorn. Why? It doesn't matter, but it's a transition. Let's talk about this again. So users are going to fill out a form. So this questionnaire is going to be either fillable through a web page, or we're going to create a programmatic API interface, because we know that there are going to be occasions where there are other systems that trigger an event that will also need the desire to ultimately create the end website. So we need to be able to create two ways of doing this. Once the questionnaire has been filled out, we're going to send the information to an API in Azure. It's going to do something really interesting. Once that is complete, we are then going to do something really awesome. It's going to do something new, something interesting, right? There's something else that it's going to do at this point is worth talking about. It's not on the screen, and it's really important. But right now you're looking at this and you're actually listening to what I am saying, and you're not distracted by anything else that has come before. From that, if we need to integrate with external systems, then we can do. So in this case, Salesforce, we can actually pull that into the process. We're going to go back to the API in Azure, right? We're going to do some more stuff that you can talk about. You could make them appear slower if you really wanted to, right? Then we're going to create the site for the Mark and Joe's engagement. But what we're going to do is we're going to add customizations to it. We're going to add some secret sauce, and ultimately salt in the wounds, right? And by putting it like that, everybody is listening to what you want to say, and the presentation has supported what you have said. No distractions, nothing else going on. I keep everybody's attention. Boop. Does anybody have any questions? Now, am I really asking you questions? No, I'm not. I don't care. Whatever. But I've come to the end of the section of getting good. What I could have done was I could have gone to a screen like that. It's a really silly little thing, but a screen like that says, in general, do you have any questions? But in going from here to here, it's relevant, do you have any questions, to the storytelling of getting good and the context of what we just talked about. And if you add something like this into each individual section, then you're grounding everybody. You're making sure that everybody is following you along. There is nothing worse than doing a half-hour's presentation, and if you've lost everybody after 5 minutes, they're just sitting around going, well, it sounds good, but I've no idea what he's talking about. You have to keep coming back to the center and making sure that everybody is following along with you. Otherwise, you have wasted their time, which in a sales pitch is a horrific thing to do. Or in general, that was great. I mean, he talked about some stuff, but I didn't really understand what he was talking about. That's not what you wanted. You wanted them to understand what you wanted them to understand, right? But actually, seriously, does anybody have any questions at this point? Because I'm going to kind of show you how I did it.
Wait, is this legit? You're asking if we have any questions?
Hey, look, this has nothing to do with JavaScript, but it's a bloody lightning talk, and other people have talked in lightning talks.
I think, Mark, this is the best talk you've given.
Okay.
No, I mean that as a compliment. You've given other talks. This is really good information.
All right. Okay. So let's show you. I mean, these are really simple things actually to do in modern PowerPoint, right? So let's look at this one. All right. So let's get rid of that. So what I have here is, so I'm sure most of you are you know about animations. You can make stuff fade in and out, right? But one of the things that you can also do is you can do a transition on a slide, right? So if I actually copy this from this slide, actually, yeah, screw it. Let's copy that one. No, let's hit the right key mark. Copy that, paste that in there, put that over there, make sure that there's no animations on it, which there are not. So then, when I go from that slide, it didn't work. It can be finicky at times. I think it's because that's grouped, actually. Right, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to do this one. I should have done that in the first place. So I can actually do that, and I can actually turn that, and I can lob it over there. I can do that. Run it. It did that animation for me. Okay, so now I'm really lazy, and I really don't want to have to figure out how to do these animations. But what I did was, in going from here to here to here, this is a very similar way to they do things on TV. You've even noticed in a news article, they move that to the right-hand side, and they then start to talk about what's over here, right? This is the stuff that they want you to be aware of, and this is the information they want you to listen to, right? This grounds you on where we are in the story, what we're talking about, and keeps you focused on the information I actually want you to listen to, right? So these animations are really cool, and I'm going to show you another one when we get there. But what it means is you need extra slides. Okay, I mean, I could have done this on one slide, and I could have moved this in the middle. I could have made it bigger. I could have hidden everything else. But why bother? I mean, I'm lazy. I got to tell you. I copy, I paste that slide. I get rid of everything else. I get rid of that. I move that over there. Boom. As long as that's on a morph transition, that's it. I'm done. So I have a transition. Simple as that. Dead easy. Right? So then when I'm come down here, this, well, as you can now see the cheat behind, I basically copied and pasted this slide, and I moved this shit around, and I changed the color, and it took care of it for me. It's awesome. You just go to the next slide, and it does it for you. But why? There's, use this power wisely. There's really no need to be able to do this in this kind of like horrible quantity, right? And you can use and you can use animations, right? So when I was here doing this, it was horrible, right? So we did it again. That's just a transition like you would do on a web page, right? It's like having a shadow on a box or something like that. It just makes it easier and better. And I don't have to push the keys all of the time, because what I do is I have an animation on the first one. Do I not have it on that slide? No, I went at that one. There you go. Right, so the first one is actually on click. But then after that, all of the rest of them are after the previous. So I don't have to keep clicking, and every half second, just another one fades out really easily. But it accentuates and it highlights my story. That's the important thing. What is on the screen needs to highlight your story. Yeah, all right. So then let's go down here ultimately, and let me show you what you can kind of really do with this kind of thing. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about how we archive Joe and Mark's engagement. This is the kind of slide that I'm sure you've seen lots of times, right? So we're going to go from here. Does anybody have any questions? And we're going to go, okay, so let's talk about archival. So archival will be done on a per site basis. Once the application is finished, and once it's done with, we're going to move it to an archive. We're going to restrict access to it, right? And when it comes to the migration of the data from the legacy system, we're going to do it by client. We're going to do it one client at a time, and it's going to be pretty simple. That really didn't tell you a whole lot. But more importantly, if there's 18 of you on this meeting, I just made 18 different visuals in all of your minds. At this point, I have absolutely no idea whether I've made a good impression or a bad impression. But I told you all the information that I needed you to know, but was it the information that I needed you to hear? Probably not, because I'm not you. And I think one of the really critical things that I want to get across in all of this is 18 other people are not you. They don't think like you. They don't have your knowledge. They don't have your understanding of what you're trying to tell them. You need to make sure that they do. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about archival. What we have here is we have Joe and Mark's engagement, and we have the archive. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to move Joe and Mark and all the relevant information from the site to the archive. What we're then going to do is we're going to shut down and destroy the site because there's really no need for it anymore. We're then going to lock down the archive so that only the admins, and in this case the TLPs, can have access to it. We can get the data back out, but you need to go through a request process to access it. And when we want to talk about migration from the legacy system, what we're going to do is we're going to migrate it by client. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify in the existing legacy system all of the individual sites by client, and we're going to move them en masse to the archive. And then we're going to do that for the next client and the next client. And that's how we're going to go through the archival process. What that did, and does anybody have any questions with that in the background? What that did was that made sure that all of the 18 people on this call had the same vision in their head. To a point, whether it's the right vision or not, less important. It actually is, because it's the same vision. So I know that what I wanted you to hear is what you saw, and it supported what I was trying to tell you. And like, we've all been through things like this, and this is really obvious, and we do these things all the time, right? But try putting yourself in the position of somebody who hasn't done this, and they need to be able to understand what's going on and how. So, all right, so before we finish, seriously, all I did with this, and I'm not kidding you, is I copied this slide from here to here, right? And I used I drew this one out from, would you believe, copying and pasting this one and making it smaller. And then I moved it. And then I moved it. In this one, I transitioned from there. I drew, okay, I drew them. I then made them yellow, right? But PowerPoint was very kind enough to make the transition when I was ready to talk about it, to go, we're going to identify all the other ones, right? And then I moved them over there. I dragged them, and PowerPoint did the rest of it, right? And actually what I didn't show you back over here was the little cheat. So when I go from this slide, whoop, to this slide, it looks kind of cool. Ooh, where did that come from? Yeah, well, actually on this site, if you take the rest of the stuff here, I actually have the other gray screen hidden in the background. So when I move from this screen to this screen, it magically appears. Really? Okay, and would you believe that that one is then hidden under this one? That one, whoop, is hidden under this one, and so on and so forth, right? I just copied, I literally took this diagram and I copied and pasted it 5 times. I cut it up and I moved stuff in. That's all I did. And I let PowerPoint do the rest of it. And it probably took me an hour or so. Yeah, maybe less so in a tech talk than in a sales pitch. But in a sales pitch, an hour well worth spent. So, coming back to the end, this presentation is about you. It's not about what I want. It's what I need you to hear. It's what I need you to learn. It's what I need you to come away from this presentation. You also have to remember that when you give a technical presentation, most people will not remember the content of what you were talking about. It's really cool to watch it in the minute and go, this was really interesting, and it's absolutely valid to show this is how it works, but they will not remember that. What they will remember is what is possible. What I want everybody to remember from this particular presentation, in summary, is showing you what is possible. And if you know what is possible, you can then use that to apply to what you want when you need it. I don't expect you to remember how. I expect you to remember what's possible and that cranes are useless. Okay, fine, right? But that's what I want you to remember. And what I wanted was for you to tell a better story. But what I need you to remember is that it is possible to tell better stories. There you go, half an hour. Questions? Oh, good. Everybody's still awake.
So
the hell were you all chattering about? Sorry, go on.
I have a question.
Please.
Okay, sorry. So Mark, thanks for the presentation. It's really useful. My question is, how do you not get bogged down by creating all these animations and still have substance to your technical talk? Because when I started doing the slides, it seems like I'm so overwhelmed by giving good technical information. All of these things seem like unimportant. And it takes you an hour to create this presentation. For me to do something like this and give technical presentation would probably take me months to do.
Dan, that is perfectly fair. And, you know, part of the reason this is what I do is because I've had lots of practice at doing it. So I think my advice to you would be, when you have a presentation, break it up into two parts. The first part should be explaining why what you are telling them is relevant. So here's this wicked awesome new JavaScript library that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show you how it works. The first part that you need to tell them is, why is it wicked, and why is it important, and why is it relevant for them to understand it? And you can actually do that in pictures, right? Whether it's an architecture diagram, whether it's the way that it's laid out, what it literally does for you on a web page. People respond much, much better to visual cues and pictures than they do lots of text. So you can, you know, throw up a picture of, this was a website and I built it in React, right? And I've got to tell you, it took me 150 components and it took me like 4 weeks to write. The only thing that's important about that is 150 components and 4 weeks. It's not the code. They won't remember. When I did it in Awesome.js, or I'm sure that's a thing, but whatever, right? I was able to do the whole thing in 20 components and in 3 weeks, whatever, right? But the important thing is it was faster. And that's why you're doing it, and that's why they need to understand it. You could have a picture of your web page up there, and they're listening to you. If you went into, this is why it took 100 components, and this is why it took 4 weeks, they're all going to be asleep. They don't care. They haven't learned anything. But you felt like you needed to explain it to them that it was all that long. You really don't have to. You get their interest, and the catch is, it was hard. This one's easy. Once you spend 10 minutes getting them over that, they're suddenly now much more interested because they're much more related to, why are you doing this? Because you've given them a pain point they can tie to. You've given them something that they can relate to, and then you can show them why. But you've got them. And I'd say you can do that with a picture of your website on the screen and just say, this was 100 components. And they look at it and go, yeah, that looks pretty complicated. Right? So you don't actually have to stress over the visuals and the graphics too much. It's so much more the story. Each one of these is an icon in PowerPoint, right? And actually in PowerPoint nowadays, there's tons of them. Some of them may be more relevant, right? I wanted to capture people's information, all right, whatever. I had a whole crap ton of, bad stuff I had to go and refix. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Don't stress about the icons. The point of putting the crane up there was actually to demonstrate that the icon itself is irrelevant. Right? It's the only thing that's holding you back and taking you hours to create a presentation like this is because you're actually thinking about it too hard.
That is
Right?
so true. So true. Thank you.
Right. And the people you're presenting to don't care whether it took you 10 hours or 15 hours or 30 minutes to put together. They care about the quality of the presentation. So don't kill yourself over, is this the right icon? Right? It doesn't matter. The story is more important.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just like to see code.
So you're really raising the bar for the presentations next month, huh?
Oh.
No. Wait. We cannot just have a whole bunch of PowerPoint presentations at our meetup.
So
I think there was a ton of good information here, Mark. Like when you get to the PowerPoint and you get to like the specifics of it, I would just say to everybody, like one of the key things is if you're going to do slides, which is totally acceptable. I mean, remember that we are a technical group, and I personally think that most developers want to see code, and I know that maybe counts as a bunch of text on a slide, but the really important thing that Mark talked about is I've seen bad speakers, and almost every one of them, I call them slide readers because that's what they did. They put a bunch of text on the screen and then they just read the fucking text on the screen. And to Mark's point, he's totally right. Like, why do you need that person there? And you can go a total other extreme. If you've seen Mike Labriola's slides, they're usually one word, and he talks about that slide for 30 minutes. But for this group, or for, I guess, there's, to some degree, it's know your audience. And I think a lot of the tips that Mark gave us here are valid. But for this particular group, I think at the end of the day, like, we all kind of want to see code in action, whether that's, some ready-made kind of code and you're running it in a browser. And again, that's specific to this group, to this audience.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That is absolutely fair.
But Mark's other point, I think, was really good in that even if it's a tech talk, there's probably some benefit that you really should highlight first, right? You want to hook people, as it were, is why is this good for me? What pain is this solving or reducing? So I think that's very valuable too.
Oftentimes, I see presentations in this group and others where people just jump straight into the how, and they never talk about the why, right? And that's why I say split your presentation up into two. Talk about the why, explain the why, get that hook, and then show people how, because then they're all on the same page. They're on the train with you. They're all moving in the same direction, right? So I totally agree with Joe. We want to see code. Right? What I want to see is you explain why I need to see the code rather than just jumping into it.
Sometimes there is no why.
Right. Well, here's
just an example. So the last time we were all actually together, sorry for folks who weren't there, I gave a talk on a bunch of different web APIs, and there was no why whatsoever. It was just like, hey, did you know this shit existed? Personally, I think that's okay. Like, if you're just introducing people to something interesting, I think it's perfectly maybe warranted to have like some practical applications for it. But sometimes we're just sharing information. Like, I'm not selling you a thing. I don't work for fucking Chrome or whatever, but here's a really cool thing you could do in Chrome.
But that was the point of your talk.
Yeah,
the point of your talk was, here's a whole bunch of cool, pointless stuff.
Well, whether it's pointless or not.
But the coolness was the hook, though, right? The hook was
right.
Okay, maybe that's true. That's a valid point.
Right. So let's say React comes out with a whole new freaking awesome thing called dog.
Called suspense,
Whatever.
maybe? Oh, sorry.
Suspense. Right, sure, suspense, whatever. Right. If you walk in here and you assume that every single person in the room understands what React is, understands the problems that suspense solve, you can jump immediately into how suspense works. I would bet that you've lost half the room before you've started, and you have done them a disservice.
Right, but that's because you haven't led them, like, to,
Right.
I mean, understand how we got here, kind of thing. Like, I mean, that's very domain specific.
Yeah.
And if we were a React group, then maybe that would be totally acceptable. But if somebody was going to come in and do a talk on suspense all on its own, I think we're all aware that you kind of need to start at the beginning and say, here's this thing called React. Here's roughly how it works. Here's this, change in how it works.
Yes. And it takes 5 minutes.
But there's
And
probably
everybody who knows that doesn't hate you for doing it.
Sure.
but you still want the why you should care about suspense.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
if you were
absolutely.
to lead with that, was it a don't bury the lead, right? Like, why should I care about this? And I think I'd agree with Mark is, maybe I didn't do a good job in my presentation, but for me it was, hey, Storybook makes this developing components thing easier. So that was the why.
Yeah, I think you're always good about that, Steve.
I wasn't as cool as Mark was about, saying why, but that was the intent,
I think honestly, I've been guilty of doing both, and you'll know if I'm not secure in what I know or my knowledge, then I do start to list more bullet points. But if my presentation has only 1 or 2 items on it, if my slide, doesn't have that much information, that's when I feel most confident. So it's kind of a tell for me of like how secure I feel about the topic that I'm presenting on. It's like more bullet points means that I'm not so secure. Less bullet points means that, yeah, I've got this. This is not an issue for me to speak about. But because I've done all of it, I've done the animation, and I've done where I've just had one image only. I've done too many bullets. I've done presentations that were too short, and some of them went too fast, and some of them went way too long. So I'm guilty of all of it at some point. But yeah, but this is really timely for me. I'm in a position where I'm going to have to do a presentation next week, and it's a good reminder of like, okay, don't fall into those holes that you've done before.
I could probably
better,
help you with that, Megan.
Yeah, because you know who my audience is exactly.
Oh, yes, I do. But you raise a very good point. That's another thing I should have said was a lot of times I see when people are doing slideshows and they're technical, the bullet points are the reminder to the speaker of what they need to say. And that is absolutely the wrong thing to be.
Yeah.
Because that is not what the other guy needs to hear. Right? Drop them in the notes. Have a cue card, something that reminds you if you need to remember what to say, that's one thing. What you need them to hear is you. And if you put your cues on the screen, they're reading your cues.
Yeah, I had real trouble with my presentation tonight in that I had all the different branches, all the different tags I wanted to switch to. And so I ended up putting them all in speaker notes off to the side so I could remember, when was I supposed to switch? What was the thing I wanted to show? Because whenever I practiced it, I got all confused. So I was like, dang it, I should just write these down. And the presenter notes was the right place.
Right. Even actors, when they read a script, they annotate the script and they put underlines where there should be emphasis and what have you. These guys are not perfect, right? They have to write themselves reminders. It's the same for everybody.
And getting back to the code piece of it, obviously this group in particular wanting to see the code in action. I've done both types of presentations where, I've had a little bit of code, as a sample, and I've also just taken a snapshot, a screenshot of the code and put it on the slide itself. So at least there is a visual of it, even if it's not a live piece of code. So I think there is some flexibility depending on what it is you're trying to demonstrate, that you don't always have to have something that it's running per se. You can still demonstrate the code on the slide and it'll still work to some extent.